Going live. Hello and welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host Ben Wheeler, and I have the program that works. I hope everyone can hear me. Anthony, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Good. That's all that we needed to check. Make sure the people, the mob, the plebs, the Buteus watchers, the glorious champions of industry who we cater to, for we cater to no less than the best, can also hear us. I have no idea why OBS failed on us today, Anthony. We are discussing uh, the pop cult, specifically the decline of the pop cult as we're watching Marvel movies and other things absolutely drag in popularity and in quality, especially quality. Personally, I put that mark at Captain Marvel and Black Panther, but other people have other things that they say, and we'll just have to go through that. What are your opinions about the current decline in Western civilization? For indeed, our civilization is marked by the Marvel movies.
Uh, yeah, it's an interesting problem. I think. Of course, I was talking with you beforehand because here's the inside baseball on how the show goes. Generally, we'll message and talk to each other about what our topic is going to be beforehand. Now you know the secret of how our conversations always flow so smoothly and flawlessly from topic to topic with no break. Anyway,
I
yeah, as
thought I
far as
was because I was schizophrenic, but that's just me.
that too, that too. Anyway, as far as the Marvel Cinematic Universe goes, it's pretty interesting. On one hand, you mentioned that, oh, as far as the Marvel movies go, so goes pop culture, and I don't know, or really culture generally. And while there is some truth to that, I don't know if that's entirely true because the Marvels have undergone the same sort of fall as the Western did, and the Western didn't mark the fall of civilization, though it certainly marked a decline.
Yes.
When the Western went, there was definitely a decline in the culture past that point because the Western represented culture. And much like with the Marvel movies, the Western didn't really die so much as it was killed.
Yes.
Part of it was that Hollywood was just getting bored with doing the same old thing, so they stopped making Westerns that people liked and started making Westerns that they found more interesting, and they were garbage. It doesn't help that the best Western ever made wasn't even a Hollywood Western, it was the spaghetti Western, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Don't at me. Uh,
I don't think
that's a
anyone would argue,
fantastic
man.
movie.
I don't think anyone's gonna fight that one out.
No, I mean, I'm being a little bit tongue in cheek to call any one movie like, it's undoubtedly the best ever is really not true. There are several classic westerns. With that said, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is probably my favorite, and I am a fan of the interpretation of the film that the good, the bad, and the ugly is actually about the battle for the soul of Eli Wallach's character in the film, with Clint Eastwood's character representing an angel and Lee Van Cleef's character representing a devil. I actually think that interpretation makes a weirdly large amount of sense, and I would not be surprised if Sergio Leone was at least intending to hint at that idea. Uh, but yeah, that's off topic now. Back to the Marvel things, it's connected to the Western because what we're seeing with the Marvel movies is something that has happened before. It happens with all genres. Razor Fist theory is that the next frontier for movies is going to be remakes and reboots, which is a sign that we really are completely bankrupt on, ideas and concepts and things.
Yes.
Kings Weebelf says, I don't know why. Okay, message retracted. I'm curious because I'm worried that like we're not being heard or something.
No, we should be
But whatever.
being heard. Like all the appropriate things are clicking. My gigas and doodads are clicking.
Well, yeah. Anyway, as far as so, if Razor Fist is right, and I think he probably is,
Yes.
then that really is a sign that we're totally culturally bankrupt. But here's the question. The question is what happened to the Marvel movies? And it looked to me something like this. So the original Iron Man movie is a flawed but very good film. And one thing that I think a lot of people forget about the original Iron Man is that the end of the movie, when Robert Downey Jr. announces "I am Iron Man," was actually like a really big deal at the time. I mean, in context, a really big deal, like in terms of cinema and superhero movies, not in the real world. But
Right.
when he says "I am Iron Man" at the end of the movie, this was in the context where secret identities were basically taken for granted in the superhero movie landscape. We had Batman, Superman, Spider-Man had all come out. X-Men was sort of an exception, but also sort of not, because they did go out with their identities kind of disguised.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, that was really like it was very much like X-Men was understood to be different. And Iron Man
Yes.
really looked as if it was going to be more in the realm of like Spider-Man and whatever. So when Robert Downey Jr. announces "I am Iron Man" at the end of the movie, it was kind of a shocking moment. Uh, and I remember watching it for the first time and being really impressed with that, with what they did in the film, and of course with Robert Downey Jr.'s scene-stealing performance, which makes that movie. Uh, he was an absolutely superb casting choice, and only obvious in retrospect. At the time, he was, because of his drug issues. This is now all old news, but he was considered a huge risk. So, but in retrospect, like pretty much nobody else could have played the character as well as Robert Downey Jr. did. I can't even imagine anyone else in the role anymore.
Yep.
Uh, and the MCU was still like, it wasn't an automatic success even after the success of Iron Man, because it was followed by Captain America, which I think, and Thor, which both did pretty well. But it was also followed by the Hulk, which did okay, but it didn't actually do that well. And Marvel kind of likes to pretend that the Hulk movie just didn't exist.
Right.
Like, I was, young enough to be following the MCU movies as they came out, and I didn't see Hulk until probably like a decade later on TV,
I mean,
and I found it fine.
I enjoyed Ang Lee's Hulk personally. Um, and I find it strange when other people don't, because it was the comic book movie. Perhaps too much of a comic book movie, but it was just as weird and as wacky as all the comic book, stuff is.
I found it a little slow. I mean, that's really my only issue with it. I found it kind of slow.
Eh. People famously deride it though. That's the thing. It's like, oh, it's the Ang Lee one that, but it's like, listen, Ang Lee paved the way for everyone in the MCU. Uh, so it's
He
like,
kind of did. I mean, the the guy who really did was Sam Raimi.
yes,
I do know that some of the based right wing YouTubers have started to kind of come out a little bit against like Spider-Man 1, Spider-Man 2, and I will admit fully that they are by no means perfect movies. However, I think that with those movies, it's less that they were like absolutely perfect in every way, and more that they absolutely nailed the look and feel of Spider-Man.
yep.
And also, there are individual scenes in the Sam Raimi movies that are truly outstanding. The final scene with Green Goblin in Spider-Man 1 is legitimately to this day like one of my all-time favorite superhero action scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, when he fights him in the burning building.
The
And like, is the
Doc
way that
Ock
they got to
scene.
that no, that's no,
No,
Green Goblin in Spider-Man 1.
yeah, yeah. I'm just saying. I was mentioning another scene that also was excellent.
Oh, yeah, when he turns into Doc Ock.
No, when he fought Doc Ock on the train and Spider Man. Uh,
Oh, the train scene. Yeah,
yeah.
the train scene's another one. That's just an unbelievable superhero moment. I also really like Spider-Man 2 because weirdly it like got the socio-sexual dynamic between Peter and MJ like dead on exactly right. How Peter goes simping after MJ and this doesn't work and she rejects him. And then as soon as Peter mans up and grows the balls to actually reject her, she immediately becomes attracted to him. It's
Yep.
actually like probably accidentally dead on. Did Sam Raimi really know what he was doing there? I don't know, but it's perfect. Uh, they're very, very good movies. Spider-Man 3 is unfairly maligned. It has more issues than the first two, but it also has its good moments.
Yep.
Black suited Spider-Man is intentionally hilarious. The way that Sam Raimi intended it, don't at me, is not a bad scene. Everybody who calls it a bad scene misunderstands it.
Yep. It is supposed to be
I will fight
cringe.
for that scene. Yeah, I will fight for that scene. I will I will argue with people on that scene. It came across exactly the way that Sam Raimi, I mean, intended it to come across.
Yep.
Like Peter comes across as a weird cringy edge lord, but that is what he was supposed to be. And you know what? It was hysterical, and it was hysterical, I am pretty sure, in the way that Sam Raimi wanted it to be.
Yep.
Like, I don't think it was accidentally funny. I think it was intentionally funny. I will fight for that scene. Does the movie have problems? Absolutely. It has serious issues. I'm not saying it's a great movie, but it is nowhere near as bad as people claim it is.
Yep. And it's
So,
like we have the benefit of having several years since those movies came out. When with Spider-Man series, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, with Ang Lee's the Hulk, and so on and so forth, and the shows that have always been going on, and the DCAU and stuff like that. There's a rich, sort of like, well, for pop cult anyway, tapestry that the Marvel movies could rely on to basically make and print money forever, if only they didn't almost purposefully ruin it.
yeah, I'm getting there very slowly, but, going through the history of it, because the reason I'm going through this history, though, is because I want to point out that I'm pretty sure that the way that the MCU and the Marvel movies generally out was just as an attempt to make money, if that makes sense. I don't think it started out as a pop cult product. I think it started out as an attempt to make money,
Right.
which is not quite the same thing,
Yes.
but we will get there. So, all of these movies that are in the background that form the backbone of what the MCU eventually became and why the MCU was so interesting when it came out. Like, what made Iron Man interesting? Well, one of the things was Robert Downey Jr. Another thing was that Robert Downey Jr. announcing that he was Iron Man at the end of the film was really shocking in the wake of films like Spider-Man and Batman and all of that.
Yep.
Yeah. So there were a couple of things that made it interesting. Thor was an okay movie with a good performance by Chris Hemsworth at the heart of it. It was and honestly, the movie itself wasn't so important so much as establishing Thor as a character, which it did a fine job at.
Yep.
Like, I think the movie was okay, but I think it did a good job establishing Thor, and I was willing to accept him as a member of the MCU after the movie came out.
It's one of the
Captain
few.
America was better.
Yeah. It's one of the few
Go ahead.
It's one of the few Marvel movies that my mother will like actually sit through. Partially because it's got the hand of Kenneth Branagh behind it, but also because it's very Shakespearean. It's very poetic. It does have that Nordic feel that it
Yes, it
very
does.
much needed.
So the problem with Thor is that once he gets to Earth, it kind of slows down badly, and it's not nearly as compelling.
Yep.
But the other stuff is good enough that it kind of counters that. And again, the important part of Thor was honestly less the movie itself and more Thor is being introduced. Can you accept him as a member of the, roster of the Avengers? And the answer was yes.
Yep.
Yes, I could. So it did its job. Captain America, I think, was a little bit better. I don't think the original Captain America goes so far as to be a great movie, but it was a solid movie, and they understood the character. I know that Brian Niemeyer and people will try and argue that that they never properly understood the character till Winter Soldier, but I don't agree. I do think that the joke where he chastises them for using language was pretty weird, was pretty weak in Ultron. But for the most part, I think they understood Cap pretty well. I think that the writing overall was better in Winter Soldier, but I think that the reason that Cap, skyrocketed in popularity after that movie is just because Winter Soldier was a legitimately great movie that holds up now. And the original Captain America might have gotten the character right, but as a movie, it was pretty pat.
Yeah.
It wasn't bad or anything. Like, it was, in fact, it's fairly entertaining, but it's not very interesting. He joins the army, there's a villain, he gets frozen in the end, whatever.
Yep.
It does its job.
And the thing is that
So,
a lot of these fans just won't appreciate it. Like from a technical standpoint, the Marvel movies were actually excellent and amazing pieces of art. You know, they had heart to them. They had the characters working with them. They had the actors they needed. Like
they did.
everything came together.
It doesn't, it honestly, though, it didn't really hit its potential until Joss Whedon's The Avengers. Joss Whedon gets tons and tons of flack nowadays, and deservedly so. He
Oh,
deserves
absolutely.
much of it. But, and he is not a good person. I do not like him. However, it would be dishonest of me to claim that The Avengers was anything but an excellent movie. The Avengers is superb. I am
Mm-hmm.
honestly, it's one of those movies that when I watch it, I am amazed at how tight the script is. Like, every single line, every single moment in that movie is adding to it in some way. It's contributing to the film. I wouldn't cut a single thing out. The economy with which he introduces every character in the film gets the audience to understand and empathize them, then immediately has them play off each other. It's just so unbelievably well done. Like, it's shockingly well done. And you almost hate to admit it because I hate Joss Whedon. I don't like, he is part of the enemy, right? Like, he is a
Yeah.
propagandist for the enemy. There is no way to argue against this, but The Avengers is just a fantastically good movie. It is too good. Like, it should not be that good, but it is, and that's almost entirely, in my opinion, because of Joss Whedon. The dialogue in The Avengers is so tightly written. Does the plot make any sense in The Avengers? To be honest, not really. I mean, like, what was Loki's plan exactly? He wanted to unleash the Hulk, but, like, he does, and it did nothing. So he just united the Avengers. And Iron Man even points this out to him, but it doesn't really explain what his plan was. Like, wouldn't it have been better if he just didn't unite them and he just didn't get them together? Wouldn't that have helped? Wouldn't
Yep.
it have been better if he was just never captured? But you know what? The film is so good anyway that it almost doesn't matter. It's so like, the characters bouncing off of each other in scene after scene is so unbelievably entertaining. The scene where the Avengers start arguing with each other before the Hulk breaks out is one of the best scenes in the entire franchise. The introduction of the Hulk, like, there's just so much that you could learn, honestly, from the script of that movie, like what you can learn from the introduction of the Hulk in that movie. I had not seen the original Hulk film. However, just by the way that they introduced the Hulk and the way they introduced Black Widow, I'm pretty sure I hadn't seen Iron Man 2 at that point either. I might have, but Black Widow is such a small part of Iron Man 2, I might have just forgotten about her.
For a long
Um,
time, Iron Man 2 was considered just the worst film in the MCU.
and because it was. I know that Brian Niemeyer argues in favor of it, and I don't deny that philosophically it works, but it's a very boring film.
Sure.
And I know Black Widow is actually somehow in Iron Man 2, which I completely forget until somebody mentions it to me normally. I remembered it now just because I'm bringing up introductions of characters, so, I'm like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, and Black Widow was actually in Iron Man 2 first, but, like, normally I don't remember that until somebody mentions it to me. So I may or may not have seen Iron Man 2, but when I watched The Avengers, I did not remember Black Widow at all. And her introductory scene is such, like, brilliant economy of storytelling. The way that he introduces the character in that scene, and then after introducing that character, it's even more brilliant how he uses that scene to set up the introduction of the Hulk. Because we see Black Widow take on this guy, take out a room full of thugs with dangerous weapons without breaking a sweat, without showing any sign of fear, and without even seemingly without it even being difficult, and she is immediately afraid of the Hulk as soon as they bring up his name. It's brilliant economy of storytelling. Establish the character, establish her as a threat, bring up the Hulk, and then once you see this character who we have just seen be competent, be afraid of the Hulk, like it's a that's how you do it. That's like you could teach a class with that script. Age of Ultron was not quite as good as the Avengers, but it also got a lot of unnecessary flack. I've seen people argue that it's better, but I think it's for similar reasons that people argue Iron Man 2 is better. Philosophically, in some ways, it works really well, and conceptually, it works really well, but I don't think it was paced very well. And I blame Disney for this more than Joss Whedon. I'm convinced they asked him to add, like, longer action scenes or things like that. I also thought the way they killed Quicksilver was pretty dumb.
Same.
And that's probably Joss Whedon because he is known for doing that. But at the same time, like, the biggest issue with Age of Ultron was the pacing of the movie, right? So this is all the setup for where we're going to now, which is that the MCU at this point in phase 2 is in a very good place. And they bring in the Russo brothers, so it's about to get better. Right now, the MCU is good. There have been less than good movies. There have been, poor movies. But the poor movies at this point are just basically pieces of, less than stellar filmmaking. Maybe the pacing wasn't great. Maybe the writing wasn't great. But ultimately, the characters are intact. And the larger story that they're a part of is intact, right?
Right.
Thor: The Dark World is kind of a mess, but the larger story of the universe still works because you can recontextualize this looking at Thor's history as long as he reacts to the events in the movie properly, which he does.
Right.
Same thing with Captain America. Iron Man 2 is another one. Like, Iron Man 2 is a bit of a mess in terms of filmmaking. It's poorly paced and kind of boring. But in terms of the history of the Iron Man character, you could look at it in its full context, and the overall story is still intact. They're doing a very good job setting up Thanos as an endgame villain with a lot of subtle intrigue and things. And now in phase 2 is where you start to get, okay, we've established the MCU as a property with our heavy hitters, and people seem to like it, right? So now let's start taking some more risks. So you get things like the Guardians of the Galaxy. Guardians of the Galaxy is hilarious. I actually really like that movie. This is another one where, like, I've seen Brian Niemeyer criticize Star-Lord's character, and I understand why he would do it, but I think in the context of the film, it is well written.
So let's keep things moving. So what's the point of your thing for this?
So the point that I'm trying to get to with this is that the MCU started out as a series that was good. Right, a series.
Right.
It started out with humble beginnings, with the attempt to let's try and hook audiences and get people invested, and then they started to take more risks. But the risks were still in the service of telling new and interesting stories that will keep people entertained. But then they got bigger. They became so big that they figured they were unkillable, and they are probably correct. And that is where we get to modern Marvel. Because Hollywood, if you do not recall, is run by the Death Cult. Because this is the real twist of the whole stream. This stream was never about the pop cult, because the pop cult doesn't exist. It's just the Death Cult.
It's just the lower orders of the Death Cult.
It's all the Death Cult, all the way down. And Hollywood is run by the Death Cult. You see this with franchises. If they don't know if a franchise will succeed or not, they will focus first on being entertaining. Then, once they think that they've got the in and they've got a hold, they will switch gears to propaganda. And that is what we are seeing now. So, skipping to phase 3, it ends the storylines, but with some holes. You start to see things. Luckily, the storylines that had been set up, this is sort of what happened with Return of the Jedi, by the way. The storylines that had been set up were compelling enough that just by finishing them off properly, Phase 3 mostly works. Endgame isn't a perfect movie, but it's satisfying. You're happy with Avengers Endgame.
Hey, Mega Buster
Right.
Shepard. Yep.
But now, in a sane world, the MCU is over.
Yep.
Honestly, like, that's really what they should. If we lived in a world of sane people, they would just end it there and go, that's it. And we would be talking about the flaws of Endgame, of which there are many, and also the benefits of Endgame, of which there are also many. And discussing that, and that would be the end of it, and the MCU would be this fondly remembered piece of pop culture from the 2000s. But now that the original story is done, and they could switch to propaganda, that is exactly what they did. And we get the first real salvo of this was actually Captain Marvel, which was technically a Phase 3 film. But honestly, even Captain Marvel was more just was more the opening salvo. It was a hit because it came out right before Endgame, so it was still riding the hype train.
Yep.
Nobody liked it.
Yep. They might say, well, it earned $1 billion. Yeah, because it suckered everyone in. It was a critical failure from anyone who wasn't a pop cultist. And by the way, like, to be explicit, the death cult is it's like the Satanists, then it's the death cult who are not explicit Satanists but passive, and then it's the pop cult under them in a sort of hierarchy, a pyramid, if you will, that is full of conspiracies. And that's just a theory, a conspiracy theory. Back to you, Anthony.
So Megabuster Shepard says the Forever franchise has been a detriment to storytelling. This is precisely true, and it's one of the reasons I really appreciate manga. One Piece has been running for 20 years, but One Piece runs with an engine, if that makes sense. Like, there is an extremely clear end goal to which the characters in One Piece are all heading towards, and they have been steadily making progress towards that goal from page 1, from chapter 1 to chapter 1024. You could say what you will about One Piece, but One Piece has focus. It has goals. It knows what it's doing. My Hero Academia as well, Yu Yu Hakusho as well, all of these types of shows. The Forever franchise I hate it. Yeah. It's one of the reasons that I actually have a really big issue with mainstream comics. Like, I legitimately don't think that if you don't have an ending, you can make something that will stay good forever. You'll at best go through peaks and valleys, but you can't have a good overall product unless you section it out into individual stories. And is that story good or bad? But it's always going to be weakened by the fact that you know that it won't come to an end. The fact that Batman doesn't have an ending is kind of a big problem. But that's a whole separate issue.
We're not. That's forever. We'll definitely talk about forever franchises in the idea of the death cult, because the pop cult, because it is their sacrament to go to the theater to consume product, and then be excited to consume the next product. Like, I am completely unexcited for any movie that's coming out. The newest Spider-Man looks kind of okay. I'm kind of interested in Doctor Strange, but a lot of these things are properties from before the Dark Times, that we find ourselves in. And honestly, I'm not going to spend money if I don't have to. If somebody's going to put it on their way or have a watch party or whatever, I'm going to do it, and, sail the high seas if I care enough to.
Yeah, no, don't spend money on people who hate you.
Exactly. It is a moral imperative to not give them money. I'm not going to say that God will cast you into hell because you simped for Marvel, but if it's between you and God, He'll cast you into hell for that.
Yes.
To speak bluntly.
No disagreement. Yeah, Brian Niemeyer has adequately addressed these arguments in his, I believe the book has that title, Don't Give Money to People Who Hate You.
Yep.
Uh, he has adequately addressed this argument. It's not about them pay or making them hurt or what's the word? I
Blackpilling?
just blanked on it. Boycotting.
Boycotted.
Yeah. Or boycotting them or whatever. It's about your soul.
Yep.
And it's about what you are doing to yourself by giving this money to people who hate you. And the excuse that, they said it was like this, but I actually didn't think it was insulting at all, is the excuse of he threw a punch at me, but he missed, so I paid him. Don't do that.
Right.
You're simping for people who want you literally dead.
Yep.
So the point being, though, that I think the first time we see the death cult in its full glory is WandaVision, actually. People will point to Captain Marvel somewhat correctly, but WandaVision is where it becomes obvious that it's not just that it's the death cult, I guess.
Yeah.
Although Captain Marvel has elements of this too. So here's the problem. It's a problem that
Hold
Mueller
on.
very, very correctly... Go
Before,
ahead.
keep that in mind. I'm gonna go over the comments real quick. It's probably those particle effects. Yeah. Bradford Walker, hey. Been eating dinner. Concur that all the pop cult idols are now being actively used as death cult fronts, and the idols are being sacrificed. There are tiers in hell, and just because the comics tier is being sacrificed doesn't mean that Moloch will ever show up on the altar either. You already said that. Earned using boosted ticket sales despite empty theaters. Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure Captain Marvel was in the end not profitable. Luffy's daughter like Boruto. No.
I think it was probably profitable because it was in the end game shadow.
I guess. Bradford Walker says folks are getting the memo that it's time to close the wall to false idols. Saw it in the comments of the latest Doomcock video. Doomcock is part of the problem. He is not an explicit Hierophant, but he makes his living off of the pulp cults or the death cult's existence, and I don't think he can really expand past that. He will be, the dude in the mask who complains about Disney forever, when honestly that's not what we need right now. We need creators. But that's not really what it is. I'm gonna toss it back to you, Anthony. Thank you for being patient with me.
No, it's always good to get the comments airtime. But yeah, this was in the latest Mueller video. So Mueller, for those of you who don't know, you should by now because we've mentioned him a few times. He is in the A tier of critics. The reason he's not in the S tier is because, short version, long man bad. Which it's a meme that he has, but the long version, I actually do think that he gets too long-winded to the point that his points can be lost, and that the true S tier creators like Plinkett and Digibro and Prime Digibro, they can get to the point and be just as insightful in less words and without as much verbiage, but whatever. He is an A-tier creator, and one thing that Mueller, I do give a ton, and I mean like a lot of credit for this, is that he beats the drum of objective quality. In fact, he's one of the only creators on YouTube who consistently and loudly beats the drum of objective quality. He is a strong believer that there is such a thing as objective good and objective bad in storytelling and in craftsmanship. And for that reason alone, he is in the upper tier of creators. Even Prime Digibro did not get this correct, but Mueller does.
Yep.
So, in his Captain Marvel video, which by the way is 4 hours long, but which I recommend because it's both insightful and entertaining. In his Black Widow video, he says something very, I think, profound. I don't know if you realize how profound it was, but the current Marvel movies are being created by people who do not understand the difference between good and evil anymore. And I think he is correct. So here is the problem. The problem that we have is that the Marvel movies already exist in a world where good and evil exist. We've already established that. It's too late. You can't get rid of it. The grimdark world is not the world of Marvel. You would need to do such a massive change in how the MCU worked, it wouldn't really make any sense at this point. That's not to say they might not try it, and there are signs that they are going to, but it's not there yet. However, the people making it are acting like there is a good and evil, but they don't really know what good and evil is. So you get scenes like this. In the latest Black Widow movie, Black Widow's sister, whose name I don't remember and don't care about, is going with Natasha to rescue the Red Guardian from prison. In the prison escape, they drown the prison in an avalanche, probably killing around several hundred, possibly several thousand people. They do not comment on this. In fact, they seem to be pretty happy about it. Natasha certainly doesn't seem to care. Now, Natasha is a character who has been defined from the beginning as somebody who had red in her ledger, and she's trying to make up for it. And now, while she is supposedly in the state of mind where she is trying to make up for her past sins, she kills hundreds of people in a prison. And as Mahler pointed out, if you think that this is okay because A, either you don't like prisoners, or B, you don't like guards, then you do not have the moral capacity to be commenting on Postman fucking Pat. Let alone having actual conversations about actual morals. The guards weren't even doing anything wrong. They were breaking out a potentially extremely dangerous political prisoner. So the guards tried to stop them, which is exactly what they are supposed to do.
With superpowers. Let's be clear about that. Dude has superpowers.
Right, and Red Guardian has superpowers as well. He is supposedly a Captain America strength level super soldier, arguably stronger than Captain America, though no, he's not. Captain America once held down a helicopter in one of the most insane scenes in any of the movies, by the way. I love Winter Soldier, but the scene where he holds the helicopter always made me go, like, seriously, how strong is he supposed to be? Like, his arm should be ripped off. His arm should be ripped off in this scene. But whatever. Yeah, Megabuster Shepard says Magneto was basically an SJW from the moment Claremont started writing him. This is correct. People who try and argue that that X-Men was always about social justice are absolutely wrong. X-Men, as originally created, were just an excuse for Stan Lee not to have to write backstories for characters. And they were turned into a social justice mouthpieces, but that's not how they got popular. And that is not when the most iconic characters, including Magneto, were created. Anyway, back to what I was saying, though. So, in the movie, her whole backstory is defined by the fact that she had red in her ledger that she feels extraordinarily guilty about, and she needs to find a way to wipe it out somehow, make up for all of the death that she's caused as a Black Widow assassin, right? And possibly the death that she caused escaping the Black Widows. It is implied but not stated. But then in this movie, they drown an entire prison in snow, and nobody seems to think that this is a problem. And that's the issue. I genuinely don't think the writers even considered this. Like, it was not even on their minds that anybody would question that this was okay, because, you know, they were against the heroes. The heroes are the good guys, so they did what they had to win. This is not how normal people who understand how good and evil work and what morality is think. You know, this is not how non-sociopaths think. There's a similar moment in WandaVision. So WandaVision, I would argue that WandaVision was actually a pretty good show for the vast majority of it. I liked it quite a bit all the way up until the final episode. And for that matter, even the final episode has good moments. But the final episode is so morally bizarre. So Wanda has enslaved a town full of people at this point, right? Like
Right.
the town are her puppets. They act out a grotesque sitcom-esque show. And this is not a criticism yet, by the way. This is actually a really interesting premise. And you could even kind of get away with this as long as Wanda realizes it, as long as you're implying that Wanda is insane and then she realizes it and deeply regrets it. Instead, what happens is Wanda releases all of them and lets fake Vision die off, and then she escapes. And the one comment we get from a positive character on her actions is they'll never understand what you sacrifice for them. This is such an alarming and frankly terrifying comment to make.
Yep.
Like, let's start off with this for one thing. Wanda sacrificed nothing. She started off the series with her husband already dead and with no children. She ends the series with her husband now actually implied to be alive, but as far as she knows, dead, and with no children. So she didn't sacrifice anything. She just has to live like a normal person. Because here's the newsflash: in the real world, when people die, they stay dead.
But
Like,
Anthony,
you,
we believe
you
in the
don't get to.
resurrection.
That's true. Wanda Maximoff, and honestly, no, like you say that, but actually that kind of makes a difference. I
Yep.
think you could have done something really profound if Wanda Maximoff had actually like turned to the church or to God or religion at the end of the story.
It.
Like, would they ever do it? No, of course not. This is one of the reasons that Daredevil again is easily the greatest comic book story ever written. And don't at me. Nobody
Stop
will either,
saying
though.
don't
Because
at me. Either stand up for your
yeah.
things or not.
I'm being sarcastic.
Uh-huh.
Also, nobody will argue with me anyway because Daredevil Born Again is incredible. But I think it's pretty universally acknowledged as incredible. And while, yes, of course, there are things that obviously that are also incredible that people might argue are better, but Daredevil Born Again is an actual masterpiece. One of the reasons, and it's a masterpiece for reasons. The reasons is that it takes the characters to impossible depths that the MCU would never ever dare to go, like turning Karen Page into a drug-addicted porn star, or making Matt go literally insane, and not like Hollywood comic book insane, but insane to the point where he's like having extreme paranoia and accusing Foggy of like hiring men to kill him or beating up innocent people because he suspects that they're the Kingpin's goons, or getting into fights with random street thugs and collapsing because his ribs are swimming in his chest, things like that. Yeah. Born Again is an incredible book. I don't even think I can oversell it. It's so good. And one of the reasons it's incredible is because it does God. Daredevil Born Again really only opponent to it. Daredevil returns, but he returns partially because he's saved by the power of the church and of Christ, and he himself is something of a Christ figure. Literally at the end of the story, when Karen, and I promise you this all relates because it does connect to WandaVision. Actually, it connects to WandaVision surprisingly directly. So, literally at the end of the story, when Karen Page tries to apologize to Matt, who has now undergone his own spiritual death and rebirth, she tries to tell him that she's the one who sold him out to the Kingpin for a shot of heroin, and she deeply regrets it, and she's sorry. And Matt laughs and says, "I've lost absolutely nothing. You've done nothing. It meant nothing." Because Matt has realized at this point in the story that these are all material things, and the material doesn't matter.
Yep.
That the loss of the material and the loss of these material things are literally nothing. It's to laugh at, because the important things are still around. That when he was at his lowest point, the church was there to pick him up. That when when everything else has been taken away, he has had this. He realizes that he still has the love of his friends and his family and the people who care about him, and that ultimately, just because he's not a lawyer anymore, who cares? Just because the Kingpin knows who he is, who cares? He still had, Karen Page has come back and apologized to him. She's the prodigal son. He's lost nothing. She's there, right?
Right.
It's a brilliant book. WandaVision has none of this because WandaVision, she doesn't even recognize that she's done anything wrong.
Right.
Like, what's the recognition that she gets? I mean, that she shouldn't have enslaved them at all? Well, yes and no. Like, it's implied, sure, okay, you probably shouldn't have enslaved them. But on the other hand, now that she's done it, her releasing them from slavery is represented as a sacrifice. Like,
Right.
that's just what a decent human being does. Honestly, WandaVision could have been great if Wanda, for example, turns herself in at the end.
Or even just
Like,
acknowledges her evil. Like, it's not that hard to have a moral core. Just saying, listen, I did this evil, but I did it for you, blah, 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 moralizing would be even better than, oh, yeah, you're actually the good person, and they need to acknowledge that, sister. It's like, no, like,
yeah, it's
everything,
so messed up.
yeah,
And the scary thing is, the people who wrote it, I honestly think they don't understand that she did, like, what people are mad about, right? Like,
yep,
I think if you were to ask them, they would say, but Wanda, but she stopped and she sacrificed her family for it. Doesn't that make her a hero? Well, no, it doesn't make her a hero because she never should have done that. What she did was horrendous.
so
Like,
what,
it's honestly on the level of some of the worst things that anybody has done in the MCU. It's truly horrifying.
yep. So to sort of tie this in more to these pop cult people, it's this moral sort of decrepitude. These people have no
Hmm.
moral heart for them to latch in on. All it is just, hey, you get what you want. I'm not even gonna say it's some sort of like, you know, alpha game or whatever. The girl gets away with it or whatever it is. Because honestly, who cares at this point? Like, we're so far beyond the early game internet that it's
Although I do think that there is something to that, by the way. I don't think that's entirely. Like, the fact that she is a woman makes a big difference in how she is treated.
sure. And I'm not saying it isn't there. I'm just saying that it's more important in the hierarchy of things that essentially there's no moral heart to these stories. There's no ability to say that this is right, this is wrong. It's just whatever is good in the moment for it. And even if they make moralizations about Wakanda or women or Captain Marvel or whatever, there's still that lack of anything that's worth anything in the moral sphere, in the spiritual sphere. It's like watching. How do I want to put it? It's
So,
like watching monkeys fling crap at each other. They are
here is an interesting
uncivilized.
comparison. Here's an interesting comparison, I think, to what happened in WandaVision. John C. writes brilliant short story, The Cry of the Night Hound. Uh,
Yep.
so this is the second story in his Nightland, and I'm guessing you immediately know where I'm going with this.
Yep.
But for people who don't know, so the story. What's funny is that this is generally considered one of the weaker stories in the Nightlands, and it probably is, but it's also a brilliant story already, which is just a sign of like how good the story is, or the book as a whole is. Like, seriously, that's another book that it's very, very hard to overstate how good it is.
Yep.
This is like one of the weakest stories, and it's so worthy of like in-depth analysis. In any other book, it would be the best story. But anyway, uh, so in The Cry of the Night Hound, the main character, Antigone, and obviously this is a loose adaptation, of the original Antigone story, but it's a loose adaptation. The main character, Antigone, wants to go out into the Nightlands and rescue her brother, but of course women are not allowed to go into the Nightlands, and no hero will go out and go for him because he is obviously dead. Which, by the way, he actually is. for the record, in the story. So she sneaks out in defiance of the rules of the last redoubt on her own to rescue her brother, and barely manages to, because the beasts who her brother raised, one of them wants to use her to break into the last redoubt, but the other has been transformed by her brother's love and rescues her at the last second, and she manages to bring her brother back, only to find that her brother was dead all along. So this is where a lesser story would end, and this is roughly where the original Antigone ended. But in this version of the story, there is just a little bit more. So in this version of the story, Antigone is put on trial in the last redoubt and found guilty of putting the entire redoubt at risk and of breaking the laws of the redoubt, and is sentenced to execution by starvation. She is walled off in an unused section of the last redoubt and assumed to die. But Antigone, being a strong-willed person, refuses to accept this fate, reactivates the earth current in that section of the last redoubt, and survives for another 70 or so years. But this is where we get the parallel to WandaVision and the fascinating part. Her sanity is slipping at this old age, but she is shown a type of stone or something that allows her to restore her sanity, and she sees what happened, what she did with full clarity for the first time. And she has this moment of realization where she realizes, finally, now that she could see with her eyes unclouded, with the years fallen away, and with her full sanity, that she did something horrible. That she actually did put the last redoubt at risk, and that her motivations were selfish and cruel, but at the core, right down in the center, there was a motivation, something golden, something beautiful. And it's this beautiful, and it's implied that this is the one true thing that really saved her after all of these years, the love for her brother. And it's finally revealed that her brother, although he was dead, because she brought him back to the last redoubt, his soul was able to reincarnate several thousands of years earlier than it otherwise would have, and she gets to meet him one last time before she dies. So where's the parallel here with WandaVision? Well, there are a few different things, and I think that if WandaVision had ended in a way similar to this, it would have made more sense. For one thing, Antigone recognizes her fault. In fact, she's horrified by it. She's repulsed by it. She says, oh my God, is that my soul? That's disgusting. That's horrendous. But at the same time, there is a recognition, even though she was at fault and she did something wrong, that there was something beautiful motivating it, and that's not completely worthless. That does mean something.
Yep.
I think that WandaVision could have worked if you did something like that. Wanda did something horrible. She did something horrendous, something unforgivable, but she wasn't in her right mind, right?
Right.
So if Wanda had that moment of realization where she goes, "Oh my God, what did I do? What did I do to these people? How horrendous!" But you could also recognize deep down at the core that this was motivated by a love for Vision and this desire for family. You don't need to necessarily condemn Wanda as this absolute monster. You just need this recognition that she did something wrong, but that the motivation underlying it is not something that is totally worthless either. But it's all just not there. They don't seem to recognize it. And it gets worse with all of these new MCU shows. You get The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which is just completely ridiculous SJW bait. If Critical Drinker's review was right, John Walker, who was the villain of the show, basically did nothing wrong at any point in the entire series and is villainized for it. I liked Critical Drinker when he goes, what makes him think that he has the right to go against enemy combatants, except, of course, for his official for his official designation from the U.S. government to which he is loyal. Outside of that, what makes him think he has the right to call himself Captain America? He's like, outside of the fact that the U.S. government has granted this title to him has given him the right to go on foreign soil and fight against enemy combatants. What gives John Walker the right to do this? I ask you. How dare he?
Right. And that brings us,
And
to the real life a bit, because these people honestly believe in the stuff that they're writing. They don't go, oh well, I know this is false, but I'll tell a lie. Like I have a story where the narrator is very cruel to another character. If she does something ugly or trips or is clumsy, he will describe it in detail, in gleeful detail. It's a gag. It's a joke. you know, Other characters treat her just fine. She's a normal person within the thing. But they don't have that tongue in cheek sort of like, oh, look at me. They don't have any sort of like, well, this is evil, but it works for the character because we want him to portray an America that is evil. They go, oh, this is what America really is. We shall sling mud at it. We shall tickle our allies' grundles and bring them moralistic pleasure for it. There's no humor. There's no justification. There's no right from wrong. It is wrong because the authors demand it to be wrong. Wanda is right because the authors command it to be right. And there's nothing in it to cut it. Right? There's no moment of clarity where she did something evil. There's no moment where Johnny, considers his actions in any real sense. Not that I've seen the show, but I assume they don't really give him a moment of true introspection. And all this other stuff. Like the Bugman, I think is these pop cultists, these pathetic little things who, as we're tearing down their idols, as their own people tear down their idols, and Lord willing, they shall be torn down in 5 years or less, and we can move on with things. Though we'll probably have other things to consider. Uh, there's there's something lost in their souls. They want their heroes to be right, and they want to be right by proxy. It's this weird paupership. Like they are poor. They are impoverished compared to their parents' generations. It's one of the things I'm trying to communicate with Jack Morrow. It doesn't matter how vicious he is in a fight. Every character who understands wealth calls him a poor man. It doesn't matter how many bunkers or whatever he has. He's poor because he's not a part of a functioning society. These bugmen are something similar. They have a society around themselves. I participate in it. I like playing card games. I've been to the movies with some of them. You know, and we can even chat about deeper topics. But when I bring up, say, Midsommar being a rebuke of not Christian culture, but sort of like churchian culture, that there's the bones of Christian society, and the second they hit something pagan, they get crushed or accept it. Or there's something in the Green Knight Squire where, not Green Knight Squire, sorry, the Green Knight where the morals of Gawain are entirely self serving, but his journey is about him growing from spot to spot. I think the Green Knight is actually worth seeing because the guy tries to say something. Gawain had to grow into a knight, it couldn't just be conferred on him. And he is a better person the more brave, the more faithful, the more whatever he is. Does that mean they understand what it means to be Christian? No, absolutely not. They want they it's kind of like the blind man feeling it. Gawain would have been a Christian by the end of the story if the person wrote it honestly. The only Christian in the story is King Arthur himself and his wife, I assume, and the Green Knight, who wakes up and he goes, "Oh, is it Christmas?" Yes, like it's one of those things. There is something to be said for the failure of the character of Gawain and then his success. He's churlish and ungenerous with a peasant boy who eventually tries to almost kill him, who might be the Green Knight himself in a different form or a fey trick. But then there's he meets Saint Winifred and he goes, well, what will you give me if I get your head? what? No, don't ever ask that. What's wrong with you? Was her literal reaction. She goes, what, like, don't ever ask that. She rebukes him, and he's like, oh. And then he never has to have the issue again. There's actual character growth. These Bugmen don't have that. Captain America is a fairly flat character. He has certain issues of depth. He has certain issues of great interest that is worth talking about, that is worth, sort of thinking about. His relationship with Peggy Carter, the sacrifices he made, and, his willingness to grow into an alien society to him. But at the same time, he doesn't actually change. Iron Man changes a bit, Thor changes a bit, but they ruined his character by Endgame, and a bunch of other things.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, it's worth noting that being a flat character is not the same as being a bad character,
Yep.
but I'm assuming you're going to get there, so I'll let you.
So
I'll let you finish.
right, so these Bugmen, rather than taking the lessons of courage, of honor, of maturity, like of Captain America's courage, Iron Man's honor in his dealings and so on, and Thor's growing into himself, becoming the Chad rather than just the spoiled brat. They don't take any lessons. They do it. Oh wow, that was great. Walk home. Maybe they make a YouTube video that gets a few views, or maybe that's what they base their entire industry out of. And of course they throw shade on men like us. They don't understand it. They don't understand the moral of it. Captain America would have been Christian to the core, and not just we reference it. It would have been, yeah, so what are you doing, Cap? Oh, we got 5 minutes left. I'm praying. You know, Iron Man probably would have, if they were being honest with these characters, he probably would have turned Christian to alleviate his guilt. Like
I'm not so sure of that.
You be
I don't know if he would have.
Sure, I'm not saying that it is something that you could argue. I'm not saying that's inarguable that he would have done that, but I'm saying that part of it could have been him turning to religion to deal with his spiritual problems, because part of his character growth is dealing with his guilt, which is something that Christianity, deals with. But he also comes from probably a, shall we say, industrial family, so they didn't really have much tuck for that sort of thing. But like I'm saying, that there's a whole element the MCU had that the Bugmen could have that they just never touch, and that is the heart, that is the faith, that is spirituality.
Yes, that's one of the. I'm trying to think how to put it.
Bugmen are flat characters.
Yeah. I mentioned this to you beforehand, but one thing that Vox Day mentioned after the finale to Mad Men, which he said was the best finale to a show he had seen since The Sopranos, is that, like The Sopranos, Mad Men, if it were ending because it was written by people with no God in a universe with no God, could not have a happy ending. And so it doesn't. The ending of Mad Men, and sorry, spoiler warning, guys. No, nobody cares. The end. And apologies to Ken if he's interested in Mad Men one day, because Ken is always annoyed that I spoil things, but we need to for the discussion. Anyway, so the ending of Mad Men is that the character have some, the main character seems to have some sort of religious revelation and goes off to some sort of hippie commune to meditate. But then the final shot of the show is the famous Pepsi commercial where they're all, singing Kumbaya or whatever the hell the song was. And everybody is dancing around all happy, with the implication being that he used his time in the hippie commune to make another ad. So he hasn't changed at all. And which is, by the way, really funny.
Yeah.
So I actually think that and I'm not saying that's a bad ending, it's a good ending, but it's a completely godless ending. The Sopranos too. In The Sopranos, there is no redemption in The Sopranos, because there is no religion in the universe of The Sopranos. So The Sopranos ends with him surrounded by enemies in a restaurant. Maybe he's going to be killed, maybe not. But the real point is that he's never going to have a day's rest for the rest of his life. He'll always have to live looking over his shoulder. Yeah, that's the idea. and it'll kill. And if it doesn't kill him one day, it might as well. It's no way to live. So the last mainstream story that I could remember that actually had Christian influences in it, like serious Christian influences, was one of my all-time favorite shows that absolutely nobody I talked to ever watched, which always annoyed the hell out of me because I would want to talk about it with people, but I was the only one who watched it because it was popular in the South, but not the North, was Justified. So Justified was about a lawman named Raylan Givens from Kentucky, and the title comes from the fact that he gave a man in Florida, when he was in Florida, 24 hours to get out of town or else he would kill him. So he meets the mobster then in a crowded area in Florida, and the mobster stares him down, not sure if he's bluffing, and then the mobster draws and Raylan shoots him. And when Raylan is asked about the fire, they said, "Did you really give him 24 hours to get out of town?" Raylan's only response is he drew his gun first, so it was justified. So he is sent to Kentucky, which is which is where he grew up and where his family is from and where he knows all of these people, basically as a sort of punishment. You know, he's kind of being banished to Kentucky for kind of playing cowboy in Florida, and that's the show, right? Well, the episode that I'm referring to is this. The 3-part season 4, or the 3 final episodes of season 4, was probably the peak of the show, and the episodes were known as Decoy, Peace of Mind, and Ghosts. And they were absolutely fascinating. And the reason they were fascinating is because it was actually Christian, like genuinely Christian, in a way that you never, ever, ever see. So Decoy wasn't really Christian or not Christian. Decoy was just a really fun episode about their trying to smuggle a fugitive out of town and whatever, so we'll ignore that, but we'll go to Peace of Mind. Now, Peace of Mind is a fascinating episode. In Peace of Mind, the story is about a whore named Ellen May is being hunted by a group. And the story with her is that she witnessed a murder and helped to bury the body, but she felt incredibly guilty about it. So she has gone on the run and actually found refuge with the sister of a preacher, and who kind of took over for the preacher, and with that church. And she has told Ellen May, if you get washed in the blood of this, then you can. So she does. And the U.S. Marshals are searching for Ellen May, and the bad guys are searching for Ellen May because they want to kill her so that she can't squeal that she buried a body. And when the bad guys go and try and find her, one of them has a conversation, and the conversation is just so fascinating because it's never ever done, like in mainstream entertainment. The conversation goes something along the lines of, so Ava is the character looking for Ellen May, and Limehouse is the character she's talking to. And he goes, "Ava, did you ever wonder, like, are you sure this is the right thing to do? Are you did you ever wonder if we're actually doing the correct thing by doing this?" It's like, I don't know where Ellen May is. I let her go, I gave her, like, the keys to my car or whatever, and I let her go, and I didn't ask her. And I'm not going to sell her location to you, no matter how much you offer me. Like, it's not for sale, because we need to think about what the right and wrong thing is to do. And when they ask Ellen May about it later, she says that she believes that God worked a miracle in her heart. So, or in Limehouse's heart. So meanwhile, we follow the U.S. Marshal, and they've just found this guy, who, the guy who they smuggled out in the previous episode, and he refuses to talk to them. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but it doesn't matter. He refuses to talk to them unless they rescue Ellen May. He says, "I could give you names, I can cooperate with you, but I'm not going to do it unless you rescue Ellen May, because me and her are friends. And she's in danger. You need to rescue her first." So the U.S. Marshals agree to go and find her. And they have this scene where Ava now finds Ellen May. just before the marshals show up. And Ava pulls a gun on Ellen May, and she goes, "All right." He goes, "You're coming with me." And she goes, "You know what? I'm not moving. I believe that God worked a miracle in Limehouse's heart to let me go, and I don't think that you're going to kill me. God, and I don't think that God's going to let that happen." And Ava tries to say that God's not real. It doesn't matter. And she goes, "I don't believe that." And Ava puts the gun down. So now we've immediately seen they're like explicitly referencing Jesus and being washed in the blood of Jesus and redemption in this episode. And then Raylan shows up. Another character then pulls a gun on Ellen May, and Raylan shows up and manages to save her. And Raylan says to end the episode, the reason that we're here is because, Drew Thompson, that was his name, is because Thompson wouldn't talk unless you were rescued. And he says very explicitly, "It looks as if someone has been looking out for you this entire time." And this episode always blew me away because of how incredibly explicit it was in attributing Ellen May's survival to the fact that she repented of her sins and returned to Christ, and that God was looking out for her. And just to hammer this home further, the final episode is called Ghosts. And in the final episode, I won't go over the full plot summary again because it's not necessary, but the short version is that Raylan does something highly morally questionable in order to protect his family. And it's a brilliant episode again, but much like the previous episode, Raylan never, unlike Ellen May, Raylan never considers the idea of repentance, of asking God for help. He lives in a world where these generational sins are basically impossible to overcome. So the question that it asks is, of all of these characters, which ones end up in the best position? And the answer is the one who repents and returns to Jesus. I mention all of this because can you imagine Hollywood telling the story today? I legitimately can't do it. I can't imagine a story about somebody repenting, returning to Jesus, and being saved because she's been protected by God very explicitly, and then contrasting this with characters who are faithless or who don't repent or who don't return to God. It's just so shocking that this even existed. And this was probably a little bit maybe a decade ago, maybe a little bit less than a decade ago, I think, at this point that this aired.
Mm-hmm.
The modern landscape is just so different nowadays, and Justified was a weird show for the time, but I can't imagine them making it now. You could see this when Marvel had to adapt Daredevil Born Again. So I mentioned earlier that Daredevil Born Again is this unbelievable, incredible classic comic book, and the reason that it's such a classic is because it exists in the world of God and Catholicism, where repentance and spiritual and forgiveness and spiritual rebirth are a huge part of the story, right?
Yep.
Well, how do you do this in modern MCU? The answer is actually pretty decently. Kind of. So, season 3 of Daredevil is a very loose adaptation of Daredevil Born Again. However, it's not nearly as good. It's good, actually, believe it or not. Season 3 of I actually would recommend Season 3 of Daredevil if you could sail the 7 seas for it, because of course you're not going to give Netflix your money. But if you ever get the opportunity to either free trial spam, which is something that I sometimes will do, or to sail the 7 seas for it, Season 3 of Daredevil is very well made and very entertaining. However, it doesn't have nearly the power of Frank Miller's Born Again, and the reason it doesn't have this power, part of it is that it won't bring the characters that low. So one of the reasons that Daredevil Born Again could never be properly adapted, even though they gave it, they gave it a puncher's chance in season 3, but one of the reasons it can never be properly adapted is because a character like what Frank Miller did to Karen Page in Daredevil Born Again is something that they could never, ever, ever do. Right?
Yep.
They would never be able to get away with what Frank Miller did to Karen Page. Honestly, I'm amazed he even got away with it at the time. This was back in the 80s. Like, Karen Page goes about as low as a character could go. She is a porn star who is addicted to heroin, who sells out Matt Murdock's secret identity for a shot of drugs. And she manages to make her way back to New York by teaming up with an abusive gangster who beats her and essentially makes her his sex slave. Like, there's no way that Disney could adapt the story. They just can't. I don't even honestly really blame them for it, but it does rob it of some of the power. The flip side, too, is that Matt is brought to a place that's so unbelievably low. Comic book insanity is never real insanity. Like, the Joker, for example, is not insane. You know, there's really no way you could argue the Joker is insane. He is quite lucid, he knows exactly what he's doing, and he can fully articulate the motivations behind his actions. He's not an insane person.
Right.
I mean, he would never. Insanity defense would never work because he could quite eloquently tell you exactly why he's doing what he's doing, and he also knows that what he's doing is considered wrong by society, and he does it anyway, and that's partially the point. So that's comic book insanity. Daredevil in Daredevil Born Again, Matt Murdock goes actually insane. He is clinically depressed. He wants to get out of bed and do something, but every time he tries to find the strength to do it, he keeps kind of talking himself back into staying asleep until somebody forces him out by coming to the door. He becomes extraordinarily paranoid. Foggy calls him and offers to help him, but he starts becoming paranoid that everybody around him is an enemy and is some sort of agent of the Kingpin, and he threatens Foggy over the phone. He decides he's going to confront the Kingpin in one-on-one combat, despite the fact that he is clearly ill and not in his right mind. And of course, he gets the stuffing beaten out of him. You know, eventually they mention that his behavior is so erratic that somebody is getting mugged next to him on a train and he doesn't even move until they get in his face, despite the fact that he's supposed to be, you know, a superhero, Daredevil. But he's not reacting to things like a normal person reacts. This is like kind of frightening stuff. You know, he is insane where he's like hearing voices. At one point, in a really creepy scene, he calls Foggy and says, "Foggy, I need help. You know, I'm messed up in the head." And he has a conversation with Foggy, and then he walks away, and you hear the dial tone on the phone going, as in he wasn't even talking to anyone. He's hearing voices at this point and just talking to the air. You know, Daredevil season 3, while it is good, it doesn't have that core of true desperation that really needs to be there for a full, powerful spiritual resurgence.
Yep.
And it has the elements in season 3 of that spiritual resurgence, which is why it mostly works. I think Daredevil can get away with this more than other shows, partially because, unfortunately, Catholicism has been co-opted by the left, especially in America, so they could ally Matt with some leftist causes. Foggy runs, for example, for, I think, governor or something. I forget what he runs for some sort of political position in the show, and while they don't say what party he is, it is heavily implied that he is a Democrat. And also that right-wing talk show hosts don't like Daredevil. And they make some extremely clunky and lame. You know, Kingpin is actually like Trump analogies, which is by far the weakest part of Daredevil Season 3. Also, by the way, another reason that you shouldn't be giving Netflix your money, because even though Daredevil Season 3 is good, let's not forget that it was made by people who hate you.
Yep.
They still hate you, even though they make good content. That's another thing that I think that people don't understand. Just because, it was actually good, it doesn't mean that the people who made it don't hate you. The people who made Daredevil Season 3 absolutely still hate you, make no mistake.
Yep.
But they're able to get away, but ultimately Season 3 does mostly work. Matt is brought to a very low point. He is taken in by the church, and partially because of him being taken in by the church, he's able to rise up and kind of regain his mojo. Of course, the other problem with modern superhero stories that relates directly to, they don't, they don't know the difference between right and wrong. Have you ever noticed that the main conflict of almost every moral conflict of every story is should or should we not kill this person?
Yep.
This is true in Batman, it is true in Daredevil, and it is true in there was one more.
The answer to that is that, the Joker would have hung himself in his cell way back in the 70s.
Yes,
Certainly,
actually.
certainly all this other things, and I say that with quotation marks. He would have killed himself like Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. It's one of those things where cops are incredibly possessive of their own lives and of their families' lives and all this other stuff. The fact that the villains go after cops and cops' lives, it doesn't matter how corrupt they are. The reason why cops take that money is because they're scared that the mob will kill them otherwise. Like that. If this was real life, sure there's always these bruisers running around, but most of the time the reason why the honest cop goes on the take is because it's the take or his life. Like somebody's gonna shoot him in the back. Somebody's gonna shoot the crusading lieutenant, cough James Gordon in the back. The only reason James Gordon doesn't is because he has incredibly good PR. That's it. He catches a bullet. These things they're talking about, they don't understand real moral conditions, real moral quandaries. I think Born Again was written by Frank Miller, right? Because
It was.
he
Yes.
he understands moral quandaries. He understands how to portray something as good, how to portray something as evil. You see it in
Yes.
300, and
Frank Miller in his prime, Frank Miller was actually a superversive writer.
yep. Even
Uh
even in like Sin City and stuff like that, you still have characters who say, "Okay, this is the line. This is morally evil," and the person they're going to go kill, because it's that kind of story, is morally evil. Like it is repugnant evil all the way down. But at the least, the one who's the lightest shade of black is gonna say, "I'm going to kill the darkest shade of black I can get my hands on." Like they can't say this stuff. They don't even understand the concept. Um, One of the things
right.
I see in like I go on 4chan, and what do you see? Porn, 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 wrecked video. There's always at least one Christian thread, which is like this weird wellspring of hope and goodness, and that's what I live for. But there's always these wrecked videos, like China wrecked videos, and you see these people, and like it's a video of some dude dropping himself and his family into a hole that's several hundred feet across. There is no reason he couldn't have turned. But it's like this weird thing where they just kind of set themselves up, down into the hole they go. And it's horrible, like people die. Like cars just run over people. Like, this one car runs over somebody, drives on, rear ends a truck, goes on, rear ends another car, drives away from that, runs over somebody else, killed two people, wrecked two cars. Like it's this weird soullessness. It's like that. That's the best way I can describe it. They have no ability to have a soul with these things. They have sold their soul to the pop cult. For Matt Murdock, overcoming his stuff, which is even a pale imitation of something that's a pale imitation. All right? They sell their souls, to rent out a movie theater because they want a virtue signal, and because they're lonely little incels and all these other things. They make these grand ideas. They pursue these grand ideas, but there's no meaning to it. The biggest picture of a Bugman's soul was the 15 seconds after Zack Snyder said that he is against hate in all forms to a group of fans who were trying to promote the Snyder Cut. Like the main reason why
Mm-hmm.
the Snyder Cut exists, and he just bastes them. He doesn't say, "Oh, you villains," but he's going, "Oh, you villains," and it's like they just sit there rebuked, and it's like in reality, if I invited somebody onto this thing, and somebody goes, "Well, f you, you know, you're wrong in all things," it's like, "Pardon me," and then it's like the technical difficulties, and you hear me shouting at the person in the background until they leave, and they're my enemy forever because they've made themselves my enemy. They could have, these bugmen, these worshippers at the altar, could have said to their high priest, "How dare you rebuke us like this? How dare you abuse us like this?" But no, they can't do that. They can't say, "I am going to overcome like my comic book hero." No. They can't even live up to half of what Matt Murdock can do in this illustration. You know, these real people worshiping at this altar can't even raise themselves out of their lotus couches to improve themselves, to have a bit of self worth. You know, one of the things I see unanswered in the MCU is kind of the idea of self worth. Characters just kind of do whatever they do, this and that, because it's their character. Captain America is going to be Captain America. Tony Stark is going to act like Tony Stark. Fortunately, he's got a bit more legs than Captain Marvel does, and all these other things. But there's nothing for any of these characters to break away, to seek something soulful, or to even just be a better person than they were yesterday. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, Iron Man at least does have kind of a redemption arc. I know that people that, I've talked to people who said, oh, he should have had more of a comeuppance after Civil War, and I guess you could argue that, but I do think I think that's more sloppy execution than intention. Like the
Yep.
intention was very clearly, I think, to give him a redemption arc, and I think it was mostly successful as well. By the way, uh, just to be fair.
I didn't
But
realize he
with
had
that
anything
said,
to redeem himself from.
so his whole character is based on the fact that he feels guilty for being a weapons manufacturer.
Right, yeah, but like that's been a thing since before Civil War.
Oh, you're referring to like redeem himself from Civil War. So his behavior in Civil War is pretty bad. I mean, he like goes to war with Captain America, hence the name, but he goes to war with Captain America and his guys because he doesn't listen to him when he tells him like, hey, they're creating super soldiers basically, or
Yeah.
whatever it was.
Well,
I don't
no,
remember. It's
his
been a while
father
since I
his
saw it.
father was murdered by Bucky, and he went after.
That was at the end of the Yeah, that was at the end of the movie. I'm referring to before that point
Uh, I don't know. It's one of
when
those
the
things.
airport fight scene,
Ah, I getcha. Yeah, I
which by the
getcha.
way is one of the great all-time superhero action scenes.
It is pretty good. Like I've got a lot of complaints about Spider-Man. I haven't even seen the movies, and I smell it. I smell it on them.
So
Like okay, hold on a
here's
second.
my actual. This is
Hold on a second. I
Go
just
ahead.
realized something. All we're doing is talking about the pulp cult, and all we are is like people like standing outside the doors commenting on the worshippers inside, and we're still in the foyer. Like, and this is like it's just hit me like a brick, and it's like, oh geez, that's such a concussion, and it's like in reality, I've got more of a soul to me, but is it like is how much the only reason we're able to give this value is because we can relate it to Christianity and not in biblical lessons we can learn from Batman sort of thing, but in the very much sort of like how can we overcome this culture we find ourselves in? Because honestly, it's like we're going in there pointing at it, and honestly, everyone can already see it. We're just a couple steps downstream from the culture. I'm pretty sure we're just avant-garding. Oh, artist cred, avant-garde. Avant-garding the Bugman thing, which we took off of Brian Niemeyer and others. Not that we didn't sort of come up with it ourselves, but we're using his terms. you know, it's like I'm just like I don't want to even talk about it anymore. I've suddenly lost the ability to talk about Marvel movies. You know, these like it just struck me with lightning. My shackles are free. You know, I am no longer stuck in the allegory of the cave, except this is the part of the cave with the better shadow puppets. Um,
Well, I think what you could describe what we're doing today is eulogy in a sense.
Eulogizing.
Yeah. So what I mean is the MCU is dead.
Yep.
It is dead. What we have now is a shambling corpse that are made by people who don't know the difference between good and evil.
Yep.
So, in light of that fact, as we look back at the MCU, was there anything there to take away from it? The answer is yes. For 3 stages, though there were signs of rot that were entering in, the MCU was good.
Yep.
It was legitimately good. There were things to take away from it. And something like, I don't know. By the way, what I was going to tell you, which I always found funny, my biggest issue with Spider-Man Civil War, and this is like the nitpickiest of nitpicks ever, but like my biggest issue with Spider-Man Civil War is when he wraps up he makes a new trip and he goes, "You remember that really old movie, Empire Strikes Back?" That always grinded on me because I'm like, Star Wars is still extremely popular right now. Everybody watches Star Wars right now. No teenager would ever refer to Empire Strikes Back as that really old movie. They would just say, like that Star Wars movie or like Empire, even if you are a nerd.
Yep.
Like, it is still very, very much in the center of the pop culture conversation. Teenagers know what Empire Strikes Back is. Teenagers know what the original Star Wars was because Star Wars is still in the center of the discussion. It has not been like that always grated on me. Is that an incredibly petty complaint? Yes. Yes, it is. That it always annoyed me.
that's
Anyway.
that's fair, millennial. It's you're
Yeah, right?
absolutely right. So right, but it's like
There's nothing to that.
right. I know.
It always kind of drove me nuts. I'm like, that's not how a teenager.
But it's like thinking about this stuff, you know, like at some point, you know, the shambling husks as they evolve into death cultists, as they evolve into this stuff, and as we talk about it, because we're not going anywhere. You know, if all else fails, I'll beat on Vox Day's door until he lets me stream it unauthorized. You know, like this isn't going to end. Like there's D-Live, there's other places.
Yeah,
You know, even
he
if
will too.
yeah, and it's like he's upgrading the servers. Like I don't really understand the details to be fair, but it's like eventually
So my understanding is that the unauthorized servers were criticized pretty early on for being very unstable. I know a bunch of a bunch of the people who were trying to I don't know, delegitimize unauthorized were like, he's using the cheapest possible servers or whatever. So which he was, but nobody really gave a shit.
right,
And which is the correct attitude, by the way.
right,
Uh, but now but now he actually is updating the server. So
yep.
okay, there you go.
Which I'm looking forward to. I'm done. Looking forward to that because it'll mean more bandwidth for us to update things. Um, but that's neither here nor there. So like, but what I'm getting at is that to me there's only enough point to talk about the science fiction greats who were apparently all revealed to be pedophiles or sexual perverts. The only point to talking about these guys is um, is to remind people that this happened. You know, it's one of those things that preceded the death cult as we know it today. The authors who were all sexual degenerates. And for some reason there weren't any. They were in league with each other. Their editors were in league with each other. there's nothing to do it. Like, they were the bugmen of the old days, and they helped kill a lot of the literacy in our country. I saw a stat on Twitter where it's like, yeah, just 10% of the country reads like it used to by the numbers. Um, it's how do I want to do it? It's just frustrating to see. I wish I could be more articulate on this stuff. Just because it's like, what can we do when we say, Marvel is dead. The new wave sci-fi movement has been dead. The pulp has been dead, and pulp has been revived. And so on and so forth. And honestly, it's just so hard to talk about, because you're basically saying these people are fundamentally evil, and they are so evil that they cannot be anything other than the evil that they are. Except it's not some active evil like the old sci-fi writers were. It is this strange passive evil that's just pathetic and gooey and icky. It's sloth, but it's greed and it's envy, and it's even wrath, and so on and so forth, and pride. And it's all the flaws mixed in together, as all good sins are. But it's just kind of like it's a shared experience that nobody can resist, except to fully break yourself from the culture that created it. Like, I can do this stuff and I could write for Netflix or whatever at the peril of my soul, but at the same time, what does it gain anything? If I get the dream contract, or if I become an editor at a publishing house that isn't collapsing, there's no point in trying to wrest the culture away from them. We just need to let it die so we can build again. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like, we criticize a lot of these people for focusing on the MCU and building their careers on it, but the question is, like, is there no value to talking about it? Because I like The Critical Drinker.
Right.
Uh, I like Mahler, right? I like all of these guys. What they are doing completely without value. Yes and no. The thing about The Critical Drinker, at least, first of all, is that The Critical Drinker is also a creator. He puts
Yeah.
his money where his mouth is. He is an actual published author. And for that, he has my respect. Is there anything of value to what someone like Mahler is doing? Well, Mahler is advocating for return to objective quality standards. So I would say yes, there is. Is there value to what somebody like ER is doing? Well, first off, ER hasn't posted in like a year now, which is F's in the chat for ER, guys. But besides that, like, the answer is yes, maybe at first, but at what point are we losing that value? Like, us talking about Marvel, the thing is that we don't really do it that much. In fact, we do it very little, as well we shouldn't. This is, as far as I can remember, like, we've had maybe one other Marvel stream ever, and it was after WandaVision.
Yep.
And I think that is correct. We shouldn't be having a lot of Marvel streams. Number one, bunch of people are talking about them anyway. Number two, what worth is there to it? Well, the worth that we have right now is to point out that they're dying and why they're dying and what lessons we could take from it. But besides the fact, I think that it's a little bit more excusable in our case, because we are also building ourselves. You and I and Ken and the other authors involved with Pinkerton's Ghost, David, and hopefully eventually other authors who I will not name because their stories haven't come out yet. Uh, and just in case something happens, I don't want to mention that they have a story with us if it doesn't actually come out. Uh, but we are all creators ourselves.
Yep.
We are actually trying to change the culture in a concrete way. And it sounds ridiculous when you put it like that, like what we're doing is so important. Like, the answer is no, of course it isn't. Pinkerton's Ghost has no delusions about what it is, right? It's a pulpy detective horror series. Yeah.
Yep.
Uh, it doesn't have. It's not pretentious. It doesn't pretend to be. It doesn't have any higher aspirations. But at the same time, while it doesn't have higher aspirations, it doesn't have low aspirations either. Pinkerton's Ghost is something that all three of us, me, you, and Ken specifically, I can confirm, put effort into.
Yep.
We are trying when we create it, we are not creating it with the idea of, oh, it doesn't matter what the quality is. It's just pulpy it's just pulpy horror. Uh no. When we create it, we are trying to make something that is good.
Yep.
Now, are we trying to create a masterpiece? Well, I would say no, for the simple reason that we have a 1 week time limit. However, for like, we are coming out with one story every 3 weeks, so we don't really have the time to go, let's work on this to the extent that we can create a masterpiece. However, we are trying to create the best story we can within those limitations.
Yep.
Right? Like, we are not just phoning it in and saying it doesn't matter, it's just it is what it is. No, we're trying to create quality, and we are also making the effort to improve to the point where we can. I mean, what is One Piece, right? One Piece has some of the most insane and creative world building I have ever read about. The world building in One Piece is unreal. But of course, it's a pirate adventure story. And it's also very pulpy in its own way. It's a pirate adventure comedy story more than anything else. That doesn't mean, however, that One Piece doesn't have some of the most powerful moments of storytelling ever,
Yep.
right? Like, as Jaji will try and argue anyway,
I
which we'll have
absolutely
to bring her on for the One Piece stream.
I absolutely believe that One Piece is probably one of the greatest manga that will ever be. Like if it isn't like the
I don't think that that's Yeah, I don't think that that's a bad take by any means. The world building of One Piece is unreal. The sheer amount of creativity on display in like everything in One Piece alone makes it truly unbelievable.
Yep. And it's
Uh,
yeah, it's just a whole lot of things here with with as the editor of Pinkerton's Ghosts, I have the fortune of being able to have the skills and the management training to talk to Anthony and Ken to get everyone to work together and most importantly to get my dreams into reality. I one time tried to get a web comic done back when I was still in high school or something. Talking with an artist and we tried to get things done or whatever, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't have that right balance of the.
hey, I also went through that process.
I've still got the images somewhere in my computer, but the what I wasn't capable of making something. I was scrolling through Twitter just to see what's going on here, and like I'm seeing empty shelves in Australia. Apparently, Richard Spencer's getting divorced because his probable KGB agent wife is leaving him because he's no longer pulling in the cash. Blah blah blah. And then this one fella, Neat World Order, who is an okay shit poster, says, "My friends are just going through their Jordan Peterson phase. It feels good to always be 3 or 5 years ahead. Check out this lecture," they say. I say no. My hermeneutics have reached a level of profundity and clarity your nascent soul will find unfathomable. I have learned the ways of slash comfy slash, and it shows a picture of Pepe being hugged by Jesus Christ. Stop watching lectures, he says, and looking for meaning in words of celebrities, and go and read the New Testament. I don't care if you aren't religious. All your questions will be answered there if you take the time to seek. And so I do feel in a way we are quite blessed to be able to see past the pop cult, to be able to see past the death cult, and to even be able to say, XYZ are probable Satanist pedophiles ruling the world from behind, the curtain, like a sort of demented and long nosed Wizard of Oz. It's one of those things where it's like, oh, thank goodness, we know where the enemies are. We know what issues are there. I know what I can do to fight, and I know that I can struggle with people of like mindedness who would tear me apart or at least throw me under the bus. If in a metaphorical sense, if I did not meet the standards by which I judge myself and others. If I just saw that John Del Raz, or somebody I think is John Del Raz, his artist for Flying Sparks was finally given a ticket, and they took it to work for, I think, IDW or something. I don't know. I can't find the tweet again. It's a pity. It's a shame. But hey,
Interesting. I did not know that.
it just happened now, I think, or at least the word got out now. And that's a shame because honestly, I need to find a comic book artist who'd be willing to work for Pinkerton's Ghosts on the Kickstarter. I don't really have one, but honestly, that's the next step Pinkerton's Ghost needs to go. And I can't really do a Kickstarter without somebody, who'd be able to do the horror. And not like sex gore horror, but just like simple, violent horror. I'm gonna talk to some people after Dragon Con because that's the big thing that's sucking in everyone's time. But it's
Let's just email Steve Ditko and ask if he's free. Did he die? How long ago? I don't think he died.
we do believe in the resurrection, but is Ditko a candidate? Uh, no, he died in 2018.
Oh,
So close yet so
I
far.
somehow.
Uh,
Darn
but it's
Frank
hmm?
Frank Miller's still kicking,
Yeah.
and his artwork is at least striking. Just
He can do it.
ideas.
He can do it. If you can somehow get him to do it for like $4,000, which I think we can reasonably raise, it'll work out. But in a more how do I want to put it? In a more general sense, is like there's things ahead of us to work on, and we're not stuck on the same old, same old. I'm still working on Branson ideas, and we'll probably do a more high value stream next week, Lord willing. I'm gonna throw together the next Pinkerton's Ghost episode. I'm going to reset my computer because something is eating up the CPU space. I have no idea. I'm gonna do all these different things, and I'm gonna hope that it'll start working again. For some reason we boosted quite hard on Acast recently, uh, and now we're up to about 1,200 views. I don't know how, I don't know where, but the boost has kind of gone down again, and we're back to what I would consider normalcy. Some people say that the internet is dead, and it is entirely run by bots. And that we are the few screamers out in the Frank has problems with Parkinson's. Aw. We are the few screamers out there, saying repent for the kingdom of the Lord is nigh. Will ye not join us? And I believe you certainly are a part of us because you're here listening to us. Mm. I certainly will not sell your personal information. But I've got this robot from China that's just making all these these offers. Oh well. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I'm not sure
I
where.
mean,
Yeah.
as far as I've mentioned this before, but as far as Pinkerton's Ghost goes, like with our characters, for example, like if somebody who didn't really listen to us were to describe them, would go, oh, they're like stereotypes is the wrong word. Archetypes is maybe better. Like
Yep.
archetypal noir type characters, right? Like Sean is a reformed alchemist who was trained by his predecessor. Jack Morrow is kind of an Enkidu-ish wild man, and Jim and Jim has that dark backstory of his own that he has with his brother and with the use of magic and whatever, and he's tempted towards the dark side. All very noirish. But if you were to ask me to describe Sean, like I would not describe him that way. Certainly,
Right.
I wouldn't think it. I don't think of him that way. I think of Sean as his own unique character, and I think that any author worth their salt will think the same way. Like if you were to ask Agatha Christie if Hercule Poirot was meant to be a Sherlock Holmes clone, I doubt that she would say yes. In fact, she would probably emphasize the many ways in which Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot are quite different. When you look at it from a distance, they do look similar and they fill a similar role. Uh, but at the same time, like Agatha Christie being not a hack writer is I think was very aware of the fact that she had to differentiate Hercule Poirot. She had to create her own character when she did it and define him in his own way, which I think she does. Merg Maggle Remaxa says, I don't know. I get the feeling that the idea of the internet being a Wild West style place forever separate from the rest of the world can never last. Yes and no. I think people think of the internet in the wrong way. When we say that we're going to be banging on Vox Day's door, we say this because Vox Day is somebody who can read the writing on the wall with this sort of thing and is making preparations for it.
Yep. Like if
So
somebody could
I
say,
actually agree with you. I think that the internet is on the way and is going to, and it is on the way to becoming less and less free. But that's the reason that we mention Vox Day specifically as the man who we will be running to.
yep. He continues to say, granted, I do support the rationale that Russia has used to ban certain pieces of entertainment media, even if I don't like that they banned specifically those titles. Yeah, honestly, Branson, Trumpton, any sort of society that expects to survive will have to ban certain media for the time being. Maybe even forever. Like, how about that? Do you want to talk about media in Trumpton or Branson next week, Anthony?
Sure, I don't mind.
All right, yeah. By the
Works
way,
for me.
okay, yeah, we can do that. And for the last comment, has John Delaroz finished Flying Sparks? So it's my understanding that there was one volume to go. However, John Delaroz is fantastic, but he's unfortunately one of those authors I just can't really spend a great deal of time with compared to a lot of the other stuff I do. So I'm not entirely sure how the plot is. I'm sure he will find a new artist. He has the money for it. You know, it's been paid for. And if the guy like took the money and ran, like John has sued people in the past for breaking contracts, it is a perfectly reasonable thing to go after somebody for breaking a contract. Anyway, yeah, so we'll try to work it since I already wanted to talk about Branson Trumpton. Branson is the American version of Trumpton that is defined half in point by its Americanness and half in by its frontierness, which I'll talk about later at some point in the future, someday, somehow. Um, is what was I going to tell you? Oh yeah, I can't remember. I lost track. I'm sorry. Yeah, honestly, the fact that no, I'm gonna stop saying honestly. The fact that conservatives, I need to firm up my spoken language. I actually swear like a sailor the second the cameras aren't running. It's totally a Christian Bale thing. I'm physically abusive to Anthony and Ken, even across the internet. Um,
It's true.
it's true. But you know, it's the pimp and strong thing. I don't leave marks. I'm just that good. Anyway, um, you know, so in the idea of Trumpton with its internal behaviors, with its control, with its tradition, and when it's with its peaceableness, and you can look back to our most popular video in recent memory for it, for ideas on it and or to sort of dive into it. is that culture cannot be left to just run by itself. There must be mavens and other things like that who are controlling the culture towards the tradition. Part of the reason why, things worked in Victorian era was that they still had the strong Christian culture that was true Christian compared to our churchian culture, which is being forgotten and was forgotten when I became a man, and which Anthony grew up as a kid with it being forgotten, even though he himself, is a Christian, and I'm a Christian. I still remember going into, Sunday school and expecting all the peers, all the friends I should have, and they just weren't there, and they were nobody, or just three dudes who were just kind of, I don't know. It was a special needs class, but they didn't want to call it a special needs class. Bradford Walker succinctly ties everything up. There has to be men at the gates holding them against all comers. Gatekeeping is good. Absolutely. And the goal is to get us into gatekeeping positions. People who understand the issues, who can say no, who can shoot down people who aren't going to play ball in the way that ball needs to be played. But going back to what I was saying before Bradford Walker's comment, it's this poverty. It's this paucity of people working together. Thank God we can reach out over the internet, at least for now, and connect with people. Thank God I'm the type of bloody minded individual who will drive his sorry butt to California, who will drive his sorry butt to New Jersey to make sure that things get done. I know I keep records of when people send me things. I know where you live, but I know where you live. I know how to reach out to people. I keep, address records. I keep ideas. Even if, and, all this other stuff happens, it all breaks down in its civil war. As long as I survive, as long as there are other people who survive with me, in our groups, we can rebuild what was there, because you better believe these lefties aren't going to be able to handle the destruction of their world. And you better believe the piles of the pop cult bodies will stink to high heaven as an entertaining sacrifice to Moloch, Satan, and all the hosts of hell. And it'll be a damn shame and a cause for weeping in heaven. But that's just what the devil wants. Anthony, I'm done. You got anything else to say?
Nope. I just assume that if and when, because it will happen, and probably, I would say I'm going to guess within around 20 years. So the dies out. We'll have to find a way to communicate via radio. Actually, that is something that we should genuinely figure out. Come to think of it.
The biggest goal for
Uh,
me is somehow get my hands on a printing press. I have some typewriters and stuff like that just in case the electricity completely goes out. But even then, it's like, anyway.
we should try and get physical copies of as much as we can. Uh,
Yep.
yeah, my thing is that honestly, we should figure out a way to be able to communicate with each other for when the internet inevitably dies, since it's going to happen.
Yep. And we'll figure that out tomorrow night, because I don't really have any way of doing anything today, as much as I want to. In fact, uh, you know, at Pulp Rev Ham Radio, this is DJ Tech Priest, screaming out into the vast reaches on his pirate station built into a failing '03 Toyota Corolla as he crawls, to New Jersey, to Virginia to see if the Wrights are still living, and then up to see if Anthony's still living. You know, bringing you
Mm-hmm.
beats of the former millennium and prophecy of the Lord's return to come, etc., etc. Because I am fully planning on going post-apocalyptic prophet in the wasteland. Because, if you're going to go for an aesthetic, don't pull back from the aesthetic. Go full aesthetic. But you don't want to start eating people. That's too far. But you want to go up until the cannibalism and the post-apocalypse. That's an awkward silence. You piece
Yeah,
of crap.
nothing. I have nothing to add to that.
Fair. You're adding your prayers that Ben doesn't actually start eating people, and starts a food truck in the wilderness. Don't ask questions. It says on the side. Uh, Bradford Walker says, hopefully by the time this internet gives up the ghost, I'll be in a lakeside hermitage. Yet the thing is, though, is that we still need your help. Come on, dude. We're gonna remake the culture. You know, like no lakeside hermitages. You know, come on, come on. I'll find you. I'll kick open your door. It's like, hey, I paid for that book too. Where's my book too? And you just start screaming because I.
Buster Shepherd says Pulp Rev Ham Radio. Yeah, the Superversive radio station is going to be keeping hope alive, baby.
Oh, absolutely. All right. Besides my intent of kicking in Bradford Walker's door and threatening him with physical harm until he finishes book two, because I love him so much. Megabuster Shepherd says this is Sea Dog
Yeah,
from the New Confederacy,
I noticed that.
bringing you the good news and maybe some Lincoln Park. Degenerate, but okay, we'll accept it. I'll listen in. Like we can't retreat. We've been retreating, and the piles of bodies will be our rebuke. And I mean it in a metaphorical sense. In reality, they'll die small and alone somewhere with their families, or they'll commit suicide, and there'll be just this long line going to hell. That's what it'll be.
Like now that this topic has come up, it is something I've thought about in the past, and I kept forgetting to bring up. Like, when the cell phones and internet inevitably go, they absolutely will. We do need to figure out a backup plan of communication, and that's certainly not impossible, but we just need to make sure that we get that done.
Nice.
Especially because that will be an apocalyptic scenario, and we'll need to find allies.
Yep. And don't get me wrong, I'm probably going to be one of the first ones to bite the dust, because I am in the middle of St. Louis, and every time St. Louis is brought up in, like, the future planning things, it's, oh yeah, St. Louis is gonna burn to the ground. Okay.
It will, yes.
It's just a depressed Wojak face. It's like, alright, I'm gonna have to go and do stuff about it. Anyway, well. I got nothing else. I'm gonna shut down the stream. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Radio. I might try and get my hands on a ham radio. I have no idea how to use ham radio.
We'll have to think about something like. No, neither do I. But we'll have to think about something like that, because the cell towers are going to go down, and the internet will go down. Now, when? I don't know. Could be 30 years. Could be 50 years. But it's going to happen.
Yep. Either way, this is
need to be able.
Yeah, we've said it already. We will communicate with each other. God willed us together, and I don't think God would just let us be a tragic footnote in history, unless that's a better story, and the author in me wants the best story possible. Goodbye, bye, bye. All right.